When Jack Lawson helps a stranded woman with a busted engine, he has no clue she secretly owns the entire dealership chain that just bought out his struggling town. Before we dive in, hit that subscribe button and drop a comment. Where in the world are you watching from? The morning sun hadn't yet crested over the rooftops of Briar Creek when Jack Lawson unlocked the front door of Lawson Auto. The bell above the door gave its usual tired jingle, half a chime, half a sigh-like. Even it was feeling the weight of another long day. The garage smelled like it always did. Engine grease, rusted metal, and a hint of coffee from the machine that hadn't been cleaned properly in months. Familiar, if nothing else. Jack flipped on the lights, their dull hum echoing across the concrete floor, and set his thermos down on the workbench. He didn't need a clock to know he was early. He always was. It was easier to face the silence of the shop than the noise inside his own head, bills stacked like towers on the counter. A foreclosure notice folded neatly in a drawer, as if tucking it away might somehow make it disappear. And behind it all, the quiet question he never spoke out loud. How much longer could he keep this up? In the small apartment above the garage, his 13-year-old brother, Tyler, was still asleep. Jack had made sure to lay out his school books and pack a lunch before heading downstairs. Raising Tyler wasn't something he ever planned, and it just happened. After the accident, there was no one else. Jack was only 28, but sometimes he felt older than the cracked vinyl seats he spent his days repairing. He poured coffee into a chipped mug, black as sin and twice as bitter, and glanced out the garage's front window. Main Street was still quiet, just a lone jogger and the old mail truck groaning along its route. Business had been slower than usual this month, and rumors were swirling about Whitmore Auto Group buying up the last of the independent garages in the county. Jack had laughed the first time he heard it. Now he wasn't so sure. He ran a hand through his hair, already smudged with grease from a stray bolt he'd picked up earlier. The day hadn't even started yet, and the weight of it already pressed heavy on his shoulders. Still, Jack Lawson was a mechanic. He fixed things. It's what he did. Even if some days he wasn't sure how to fix his own life. The air in Briar Creek carried the scent of early spring damp earth, budding trees, and the faint trace of gasoline that always lingered around Lawson Auto. But beneath the season's promise of renewal, something heavier hung in the air. The kind of heaviness that settled in your chest, low and slow, like a storm just waiting to break. Jack stood at the counter, a thin envelope in his hand, the Whitmore Auto Group logo stamped clean in the corner. It wasn't the first letter he'd gotten from them, but this one was different. It was thicker, formal, the kind of letter that didn't ask it told. He didn't open it right away. Instead, he stared at the garage through the glass office door, at the empty bay where his dad used to work, at the mismatched toolboxes, the rust spots on the lift, the wall calendar still stuck on last month. This place was a little rough around the edges, but it was his. More than that, it was all he had left of his father, of the life he'd built brick by brick after coming home from the service. He finally tore the envelope open and scanned the first few lines. Terms. Consolidation. Buyout, relocation, the kind of language that tried to sound polite while slowly pulling the ground out from under you. Jack let out a low breath and dropped the letter on the counter. It wasn't just him. Whitmore had already bought up the 3 garages in the neighboring towns, big city efficiency swallowing small-town grit. And now, it seemed, they were coming for Briar Creek, too. He heard the jingle of the front door and looked up to see Mr. Phelps from the hardware store wandering in, holding a carburetor part like it might bite him. "Morning, Jack," he said. "Still, the best place in town to get a fix." Jack forced a smile. For now. He took the part and got to work, but his mind wasn't on the repair. It was on the letter, the fading paint on the shop sign, the accounts overdue, and the slow, creeping sense that the world outside Briar Creek was closing in faster than he could keep it out. And this time, he wasn't sure if grit alone would be enough to stop it. Rain streaked across the windshield like silver threads, blurring the road ahead into a hazy smear of headlights and shadows. Jack gripped the wheel of his rust-speckled pickup, wipers thudding rhythmically against the glass as he made his way down Route 17. It was the kind of night that made you wish you'd stayed inside cold, wet, and just heavy enough to press against your bones. He was heading home after a long day at the garage, the kind where nothing went right, and every bolt seemed welded in place. The coffee in his thermos was cold, the dashboard heater was wheezing, and his thoughts kept circling back to the Whitmore letter, folded in the glove box like a ticking bomb. He hadn't told Tyler about it yet. Didn't want to. Not until he knew what it really meant. Up ahead, a pair of hazard lights flashed faintly through the curtain of rain. Jack squinted. A Carno. An SUV was pulled off to the shoulder, angled slightly like it had drifted there with its last breath. He slowed as he passed, then checked his mirror. No one else was stopping. He let out a breath, muttered something under it, and pulled over. Stepping out, the rain greeted him with a slap to the face, soaking through his flannel within seconds. He jogged toward the stranded vehicle, noting the sleek lines and polished finish even under the dirt. It wasn't just any SUV, it was top of the line. Way out of place on this stretch of cracked pavement and cornfields. A woman stood beside the driver's door, arms crossed tightly, her coat doing little to fight the rain. She looked up as he approached, strands of wet hair clinging to her cheeks. Despite the weather, she held herself with quiet composure, no panic, no theatrics. Just a faint flicker of hope in her eyes. "Car die on you?" Jack asked, raising his voice over the rain. Engine sputtered, then quit. "Battery's fine." "I think it's something deeper," she said, tone calm but clipped. Jack nodded, already moving toward the hood. "Pop it. Let's take a look." As the latch clicked and he lifted the hood, a puff of steam escaped into the night air. Something about her felt familiar and strange all at once, like she didn't belong here, yet somehow fit. He didn't ask her name. Not yet. First, he had a job to do. The hood creaked as Jack propped it open, steam curling into the rain like breath from a tired beast. He leaned in, flashlight in one hand, the other already checking lines, hoses, and connectors with practiced ease. The engine was a modern beast-sleek, efficient, and unforgiving. Definitely not something he saw every day at Lawson Auto. Behind him, the woman hovered a few feet back, arms still crossed, her designer coat now soaked through at the shoulders. The headlights painted her face in soft gold and shadow. She wasn't shivering, she wasn't complaining. She just watched, quiet and steady, like she was trying to read him the way he read engines. After a few minutes, Jack wiped his hands on a rag he'd pulled from his back pocket. "Fuel injector wire came loose," he said. "Simple fix. You're lucky it didn't short out anything else." She exhaled. Part relief, part exhaustion. "I knew it was something like that. Well, not exactly that, but something." Jack smirked, just a flicker. "Try it now." She slid behind the wheel, turned the key, and the engine purred to life like it had never quit. Jack gave the hood a gentle pat before lowering it. She stepped out again, umbrella now in hand. "Thank you. Seriously. I don't know what I would have done if you hadn't stopped," he shrugged. "Just doing what anyone should." She extended a hand. "I'm Grace." He hesitated before shaking either grip was firm but warm. "Jack." "Well, Jack, can I at least pay you for your time?" He shook his head. "No need. Wasn't much. Just a wire." She blinked, surprised. "Most people wouldn't pull over, let alone fix a stranger's car for free." "I'm not most people," Jack said simply, heading back toward his truck. "Waitlet meet? Least buy you a coffee sometime?" But he was already climbing in, shutting the door before the cold could chase him inside. With a wave and a nod, he pulled back onto Route 17, tires hissing against the wet road. Grace stood there in the rain, engine running behind her, watching his taillights vanish into the dark, unable to shake the feeling that she'd just met someone who mattered. The office lights cast a warm, golden hue across the polished hardwood floors of the Whitmore Auto Group headquarters, a stark contrast to the cold, wet roadside where Grace had spent the previous evening. Here, Everything gleamed glass, chrome, and quiet authority. The floor-to-ceiling windows offered a sweeping view of the city skyline, but Grace wasn't looking at it. She stood at the edge of the conference table, flipping through the latest acquisition files with a hollow kind of focus. Her assistant, Nina, hovered nearby, tablet in hand. The Briar Creek property closes in 2 weeks. Final contracts are in your inbox for review. Grace nodded absently, still staring at the top folder. Lawson Auto. Small town, privately owned, barely afloat. The kind of place that wouldn't survive another quarter without being absorbed. Normally, this would be a routine buyout-and easy win. But now, it felt anything but. She closed the folder gently, as if it might bite. What do we know about the owner? Jack Lawson, mechanic, took over after his father passed. Been running it solo ever since. Financials are weak, barely breaking even. Grace's mouth twitched, something unreadable behind her eyes. And he has no idea who I am. Nina hesitated. You mean, after last night? Grace nodded. She hadn't planned on being in Briar Creek. She'd been en route to a site meeting in another town when her SUV started sputtering, and when Jack had pulled over, soaked to the bone but calm and capable, she hadn't introduced herself with a title or a resume. Just Grace. It had been instinct, maybe self-preservation. She was used to people treating her like a checkbook, not a person. But Jack, he didn't ask for anything. Not even her last name. Now she knew why that small garage had felt different. Because it wasn't just another acquisition, it was his life. Nina's voice was soft. Should we hold the deal? Grace looked out the window, her reflection faint in the glass. No, not yet. But inside she knew the truth. She wasn't just another grateful stranger on the side of the road. She was the reason his world was about to change. The sign on the edge of Briar Creek still swung on rusty hinges, half swallowed by wild ivy and time. It read, "Welcome to Briar Creek, Est. 1892, though the paint was chipping and the optimism had faded." Grace drove past it slowly, in a rental car, something plain, intentionally forgettable. No luxury badge, no custom features, just 4 wheels and anonymity. Main Street stretched before her in a slow, quiet sprawl. A diner with handwritten specials in the window. A barber shop with one of those old candy cane poles that still turned, stubborn and proud. She parked across from Lawson Auto, letting the engine idle as she sat back and just watched. It wasn't part of the plan. She was supposed to fly in, meet with the zoning team, check off a few boxes, and approve the final logistics for the transition. The buyout was already in motion. Contracts drafted, real estate whispers floating down through the company ranks like inevitabilities. But after that night on Route 17, after the way Jack had looked at her without expectation or calculation, she couldn't bring herself to sit behind a desk and make decisions from a distance. So here she was. Grace Whitmore, CEO, billionaire heiress, business strategist playing the part of a quiet traveler in a quiet town, trying to see the place through his eyes. The garage was alive with motion. Jack was under the hood of a rusted pickup, sleeves pushed up, talking to an older man who looked like he'd spent half his life behind the wheel of that truck. They laughed about something, just a quick moment, but it stuck with her. There was no clock punching here, no corporate gloss. Just real people solving real problems with grit and elbow grease. She turned her gaze to the surrounding storefronts. Half of them were closed or for sale. The other half hung on by the edge of their nails. Whitmore Auto Group could bring jobs, sure. Streamlined service, bulk deals, shiny new buildings. But in doing so, would it erase places like Lawson Auto? Would it take this town's identity and file it away under progress? Grace pressed her fingers to her temple, tension tightening behind her eyes. For the first time in a long time, she wasn't sure if winning meant doing the right thing. The bell above the garage door gave a half-hearted jingle as Grace stepped into Lawson Auto, the scent of oil, dust, and something faintly metallic wrapping around her like a memory. The space was warmer than she expected, not just in temperature, but in atmosphere. Tools lined the walls in mismatched hooks and pegboards, and a small radio hummed softly from the back, crackling through a country tune that seemed older than the paint on the walls. Jack was bent over the open hood of a Jeep, sleeves rolled up, forearms streaked with grease. He didn't look up right away, too focused on the engine in front of him, but his voice carried across the room. "Be right with you." Grace smiled to herself, the corner of her mouth twitching with something she hadn't felt in days: patience, sincerity. A man so different from the world she came from, where people tripped over themselves to gain her attention. She glanced around while she waited. A photo of two boys' own, clearly younger, sat on a cluttered desk, framed in a cracked plastic border. A sticky note was tacked beside it with the words, "Pick up Tyler, 3:15, scrawled in blocky, all-caps handwriting. It grounded her, that little detail. A reminder that Jack was more than just a mechanic. He was a caretaker, a brother. Jack finally looked up, surprised recognition flickering across his face as he wiped his hands on a shop rag. "Grace?" She nodded. "Hope it's okay I stopped by. My car's fine, just thought I'd say thank you, properly." He looked at her a moment longer, cautious, but not unkind. "You didn't have to come all the way out here for that." "Maybe not," she said, "but I wanted to." There was a beat of quiet before Jack gestured toward the office. "Coffee's bad, but it's free." She laughed, the sound light and real. "Perfect. I've had enough perfect coffee to last a lifetime." They stepped into the tiny office, its worn furniture and dusty blinds, a world away from the glass towers she usually called home. And yet, as she sat across from Jack, sipping bitter coffee from a chipped mug, Grace felt something rare and grounding settle in her chest. She didn't need to be Grace Whitmore here, just Grace was enough. The rain had cleared by the next morning, leaving Briar Creek washed in the kind of crisp sunlight that made everything look softer than it was. Jack stood just outside the garage, a wrench in one hand, staring down the tailpipe of a stubborn sedan when he saw her again. Grace. Same calm stride, same understated coat, hair pulled back in a loose twist that somehow still looked effortless. She didn't wave this time, just offered a small smile as she approached, her hands tucked into her pockets. "Didn't expect to see you again," Jack said, wiping his hands on a rag that had seen better days. "I was in the area," she replied lightly. "Thought I'd see if your coffee's as bad as you warned." Jack chuckled despite himself. "You're brave." They stood there, in the quiet, the hum of the street behind them. She didn't press. That was the strange part. Most people who came by the shop wanted something. A favor, a fix, a discount. But Grace stood with that same quiet patience he'd noticed the first night, like she was just there to be there. Finally, he nodded toward Main Street. "There's a diner 2 blocks down. Coffee's slightly better. Slightly." Her smile widened, and for a moment Jack felt the tightness in his chest ease. "I'll take slightly," she said. The Briar Creek Diner was a time capsule: cracked vinyl booths, laminated menus, and a waitress who knew everyone's order before they sat down. Jack slid into a booth across from Grace, already regretting it a little, but too curious to pull away. Over mugs of steaming mediocre coffee, they talked, not about engines or businesses or anything heavy. Just little things. She asked about the town, about Tyler, about how long Jack had run the shop. He asked where she was from. She gave him vague answers, and he didn't push. There was something easy about her, something grounded beneath the polish. And though Jack couldn't quite place it, a voice in the back of his mind told him this wasn't just a stranger with car trouble. Still, she hadn't given him a reason to doubt her. And for now, that was enough. 1 coffee. No pressure, just 2 people, finding something quiet in the noise. The sun hung low in the afternoon sky, casting long shadows across Briar Creek's worn sidewalks and aging brick storefronts. Jack walked beside Grace, hands in his pockets, posture relaxed in that guarded way of his, like someone who'd learned long ago not to expect too much, but still kept showing up anyway. Grace matched his pace, boots tapping lightly on the uneven pavement. It wasn't the kind of town she was used to. No towering glass buildings, no bustling streets or luxury storefronts. But there was something honest in the way the place wore its year's paint peeling on the hardware store sign, flower boxes tilting from tired windows, the soft chime of a bell every time someone opened the bakery door. They passed a young couple hanging a hand-painted grand reopening sign in the window of a small bookstore. Across the street, an older man swept the sidewalk outside his barber shop, nodding at Jack as they passed. "You know everyone," Grace said, not teasing, just noticing. Jack shrugged. "Small town. You either know everybody or they know you." They paused outside the fire station, where a group of kids was laughing and climbing on a retired engine parked out front. A woman in her 50s gray-streaked hair and a Briar Creek EMS jacket offered Jack a friendly wave. "That's Linda, runs the station and half the town's fundraisers. Probably more qualified to be mayor than the guy who actually is," Jack said, watching the kids with a flicker of fondness. Grace tucked her hair behind her ear. "It's different. Most towns like this are fading." Jack looked at her, his expression unreadable. "We are fading. Slowly. Every year another shop closes. Another family packs up. Whitmore buys out the garages. And suddenly, folks who've been fixing cars for 40 years are handing out resumes at the grocery store." Grace's breath caught at the name. He said it so plainly. Without knowing, he was speaking to someone who carried it like a second skin. She looked around. The town didn't sparkle, but it had roots. It had people who fought to hold on to something they loved, even if it meant working harder for less. "You ever think of leaving?" she asked softly. Jack shook his head. "This place raised me. Can't just walk away from that." Grace nodded, her throat tightening. For the first time, she didn't see numbers or property potential. She saw home and the quiet heartbreak of watching it slip away. Grace showed up at the garage the next morning in jeans that looked too new and a ponytail that wouldn't survive the hour. Jack noticed both but didn't say a word. She stood by the entrance with a half smile and a little shrug, like even she wasn't sure what she was doing there. "I thought maybe you could use an extra pair of hands," she offered, holding up a tray with 2 lemonades sweating through their plastic lids. "And before you say no, I already spilled one on myself in the car, so technically I'm earning this." Jack arched an eyebrow, then smirked. "You bring sugar and a willingness to get dirty, who am I to argue?" He handed her a shop rag, and from that moment, the day unfolded in a rhythm neither of them expected. Grace swept the office floor, though she mostly just shuffled around old receipts and dust bunnies. She organized a shelf of spark plugs until Jack quietly came behind her and reordered them properly. At one point, she held a flashlight while he worked under the hood of a Chevy, her wrist cramping, her arm trembling, but determined not to complain. "You're pointing it at my ear," Jack said. Voice muffled under the engine. She adjusted it, squinting. "Maybe your ear is where the real problem is." He chuckled, low and amused, and she smiled like she'd earned something. By lunchtime, her hair was falling out of its tie, and her shoes had caught a smear of motor oil she'd later learn never comes out. They sat on the tailgate of Jack's truck, sipping lemonade and watching the breeze stir the tree branches lining the lot. "This place feels honest," Grace said, her voice softer now, the usual polish traded for something more real. "Like it knows exactly what it is and doesn't try to pretend." Jack glanced at her, then looked away before his gaze lingered too long. "That's all I've ever wanted it to be." They didn't say much after that. But the silence between them wasn't heavy. It was comfortable. Like two people quietly beginning to understand that whatever this was, this unlikely pairing of grease-stained grit and hidden elegance, it might be worth showing up for again tomorrow. The afternoon sun filtered through the garage, windows slanting in long golden streaks across the concrete floor. Jack was elbow-deep in the guts of a vintage Ford truck, knuckles scraped, face streaked with grease. Grace sat nearby on an overturned milk crate, legs crossed, pretending to organize a box of random screws and washers that likely hadn't been sorted in decades. There was a kind of quiet that filled the space between them, not awkward, not forced. Just the low hum of work and air thick with the scent of oil, metal, and something almost like memory. Grace broke the silence first. "You've got a way with engines. Like you're listening to them." Jack didn't look up. "Machines make more sense than most people," she smiled faintly. "Where'd you learn? Your dad?" At that, he paused, fingers still against the rusted edge of the manifold. He didn't answer right away. Just exhaled, slow and quiet, then leaned back and wiped his hands on a rag that had seen better years. "Yeah. My dad opened this place before I was born," he said. "Started with one bay, one lift, and a toolbox held together with duct tape and prayer." Grace set the screws aside, listening. "He taught me everything," Jack continued. "How to hold a wrench, sure, but also how to treat people. He'd fix a car even if someone couldn't pay, say they'd settle up when they could. Most did. Some didn't. He didn't care." A soft smile crossed his face, but it didn't quite reach his eyes. "He died 6 years ago. Stroke. Fast and quiet, like everything he did. My mom passed a year later. Cancer. Tyler was 7. I was. Not ready." Grace's heart ached at the way he said it. Flat. Not bitter. Just worn. "I kept the shop going," Jack said, voice low. "Not because it made sense financially, hell, it barely does, but because it's all I've got left of him. Of them." Grace didn't speak right away. She could see it now, the weight he carried, the sacrifices that never made the books, the boy who never got the chance to just be a boy. She reached out, barely brushing his arm. "They'd be proud, you know, of how you kept this place and Tyler running." Jack looked at her then, and something in his guarded expression shifted. Not wide open. Not yet. But maybe. Just enough. The city skyline shimmered behind the office window, all steel and light and cold perfection. Grace stood with her arms crossed, gaze fixed on nothing in particular, while Nina paced behind her, tablet in hand and concern carved into every line of her face. "You can't keep pretending, Grace," Nina said, voice low but firm. "The buyout's moving forward. Contracts are circulating. If Jack finds out who you are from someone else—" Grace turned, eyes sharp. "I know." Silence stretched between them, thick with all the words Grace didn't want to hear. She paused, then shook her head. "I didn't plan for this. I stopped on the side of the road thinking it was nothing. A flat tire, a stranger, and now, I'm having coffee in a garage and sorting screws like it means something." Nina softened, stepping closer, because it does mean something. Grace leaned against the desk, arms bracing her weight. "He looks at me like I'm just a person. Not a brand, not a deal to close, no expectations, no angle. And for once, I don't want to be the one holding all the cards." "You're Grace Whitmore," Nina said gently. "You always hold the cards. Not with him." Her voice cracked on the edges of the words. In Briar Creek, her name didn't follow her like a shadow. Jack didn't ask about money, didn't care about the suit she wore or the name stitched into her company. He saw her just Grace. And more than that, he trusted her. She could feel it in every look, every quiet moment between them. And that trust would break the moment he knew. Nina touched her arm. "The longer you wait, the worse it's going to hurt. For both of you." Grace nodded slowly, eyes clouded. "I know." But she wasn't ready. Not yet, because the truth wasn't just her name. It was the damage that came with it. And she wasn't sure Jack Lawson could ever look at her the same way once he knew she was the one quietly threatening to take everything he'd built. The days turned cooler in Briar Creek, the air crisp with that unmistakable hint of fall wood smoke, dry leaves, and cider. Main Street buzzed with quiet anticipation as the town prepared for its annual Fall Festival, an event that stitched the whole community together like a well-worn quilt. Jack, never one for crowds or pageantry, somehow found himself roped in anyway. Blame tradition. Or maybe this year blame Grace. He leaned against the hood of an old '57 Chevy Apache parked out front of the garage, its faded teal paint barely clinging to the body. The truck had belonged to Old Man Duffy before he passed, and the town had voted unanimously to use it in the festival parade. The catch? It hadn't run in years. Grace strolled up with 2 coffees in hand and a paint-smeared flannel tied around her waist. "Tell me we're not pretending this thing is street legal." Jack grinned. "We're not pretending. It's not." She handed him a cup, then circled the truck like she was sizing up a dragon. "You really think it'll be ready by Saturday?" "It'll be ready," he said. "With a little help." She raised an eyebrow. "So I'm officially promoted from flashlight holder to grease monkey?" "Temporary position," he replied. "No benefits." That afternoon, the 2 of them worked side by side in the crisp air, hands dirty, sleeves rolled, the old truck slowly coming back to life under their shared effort. Grace laughed more than Jack had ever seen her laugh, real, unguarded laughter that made his chest tighten for reasons he didn't understand and didn't want to. At one point, she accidentally knocked over a tray of lug nuts, sending them scattering across the concrete. She froze, wide-eyed. Jack just looked at her, then said, "Congratulations, you've passed the first test. Is there a second? Wait until you see what happens when we try to paint this thing." As the sun dipped low and the sky turned pink around the edges, they sat on the truck bed, sipping cider from paper cups, while the engine purred softly alive for the first time in years. Grace leaned back, her shoulder brushing his. "You know, I never used to get why people stayed in small towns." Jack glanced at her. "And now?" She smiled, soft and distant. "Now I think maybe I do." The night sky stretched wide and clear above Briar Creek. Stars spilled across it like scattered salt. The fall festival had wound down to quiet ember slaughter, fading, music trailing off into the stillness. Jack and Grace lingered near the edge of the fairgrounds, where the glow of the string lights gave way to moonlight and shadow. They walked slowly, side by side, neither in a hurry to say goodbye. The air was brisk, the kind that carried the scent of hay bales and bonfire smoke. Jack's jacket hung loosely over Grace's shoulders. She'd shivered once, and he didn't think twice. She hadn't given it back. They said little at first. Just shared the silence, the kind that comes easy when something's growing in the space between words. "You look different tonight," Jack said at last, glancing sideways. "Different how?" "Lighter. Like you were actually enjoying yourself." Grace smiled faintly. "I think I was." She paused. "It's easy to forget the world's still spinning when you're here." He nodded. "That's the trick, I think. Keep your feet on the ground long enough, and you stop noticing how fast it all moves." They stopped at the edge of the overlook, the town glowing faintly below, and for a moment the world shrank to the few inches between them. Jack looked at her, really looked at her. Her eyes weren't hiding tonight. Not behind sarcasm or deflection. Just soft, open, searching. He wanted to close that distance. Wanted to reach out, tuck that one strand of hair behind her ear, say something that explained what had been simmering beneath the surface for weeks. She looked up at him like she felt it too. And for one suspended moment, it felt inevitable. But neither moved. Grace dropped her gaze first, her breath catching. "We should probably head back." Jack cleared his throat, taking a step back. "Yeah, probably." They didn't speak on the walk home. Not because there was nothing to say, because there was too much. And somewhere deep down, both knew the truth. This wasn't nothing, but neither of them was ready to make it something. The envelope was plain, no bold lettering, no fancy logos, just Jack's name typed in a sterile font and a return address he didn't recognize. He found it wedged between an overdue utility bill and a pizza flyer in the mailbox outside the garage, his fingers already cold from the early frost clinging to the metal box. He didn't open it right away. Just stood there on the gravel path, eyes scanning the envelope like it might vanish if he stared long enough, but it didn't. And something in his gut already knew what it was. Inside the garage, the morning still smelled like yesterday faint exhaust, old oil, and the lingering trace of the coffee Grace had brought the day before. The place felt quieter now, like even the tools were holding their breath. Jack sat at the front desk, cleared a spot between the clutter, and sliced the envelope open with a pocket knife. As he unfolded the letter, the words jumped off the page with clinical precision. Dear Mr. Lawson, we are writing to inform you that Whitmore Auto Group has finalized its acquisition plans for Briar Creek and the surrounding area. Lawson Auto has been identified as a target property under Phase 3 consolidation, scheduled for completion by December 31st. Please find enclosed the transition timeline and exit documentation for your review. He stopped reading. His hand lowered slowly, letter limp in his grip. The silence in the garage felt louder now, pressing against his temples. He looked around the room at the cracked clock above the tool bench, the framed photo of his dad beside the register, the grease-stained floor he'd swept every night since he was 16. This was more than a shop. It was a promise, a legacy, and now it had an expiration date. Jack set the letter down, the paper curling slightly at the edges. For a moment, he just sat there, elbows on the desk, head in his hands. No warning, no negotiation. Just a quiet goodbye dressed up in formal language. The garage was still standing, but Jack could already feel the walls closing in. Jack hadn't called in 2 days. Not a text, not a casual drop-by. Not even a sarcastic comment about her being the worst flashlight holder in Briar Creek history. Grace noticed it right away, the way people notice when something that once felt natural suddenly disappears. She passed by the garage on her morning walk, pretending she was just out for fresh air. The lights were on. Jack's truck was parked out front, but the garage door was only half open, like the place couldn't quite decide if it was open to the world or not. She stepped inside, the familiar jingle of the bell overhead sounding sharper than usual. Jack was at the workbench, hunched over an alternator with a concentration that felt more like avoidance. He didn't look up. Hey. Grace smiled, gentle but unsure. Hey. Thought I'd stop by, see if you needed a break. I brought coffee. He nodded, still not meeting her eyes. Appreciate it. She set the cup down beside him, the silence stretched long. Not easy like it used to be, but stiff and comfortable. You okay? She asked finally. Jack gave a short laugh, humorless. Yeah, sure, just peachy. Garage is getting bought out from under me. Business I've poured my whole damn life into is about to have its name scraped off the door. Nothing to worry about. Grace's throat tightened. The urge to tell him to just say it burned behind her ribs. But the words stuck. Every time she thought she'd found the right moment, the right tone, it vanished under the weight of what it might do to him. She stepped closer. Jack, I'm so sorry. I know this place means everything to you. He finally looked at her then, eyes tired and sharp. No offense, Grace, but you don't know the half of it. That stung more than she expected. She nodded slowly. You're right. I don't. He went back to the alternator, shoulders tense. Grace stood there for another beat, hoping he'd say something else. Invite her in. Let her help. But he didn't. And, as she walked out, heart heavy, she realized what scared her most wasn't losing his trust when the truth came out. It was the thought that she might already be losing him before it ever had the chance. The letter came in a sleek white envelope, no return. Address, no corporate stamp, just a neat line of text. Briar Creek Small Business Revitalization Grant. Jack nearly tossed it in the trash without opening it, assuming it was more junk mail or another cruel reminder of what he was about to lose. But something made him tear it open. He read it twice, then a third time, sitting motionless at the front counter while the radio played softly in the background. It didn't make sense. A grant unsolicited, generous, immediate. Enough money to cover overdue bills, order parts, even pay off the latest lien on the garage. No strings attached. No catch he could see. He stared at the letter, jaw clenched. Small Business Revitalization, he muttered under his breath. Yeah, right. Jack didn't believe in coincidence. Not anymore. The timing was too clean, the wording too polished. It felt like a bandage slapped over a bullet wound, a quiet attempt to soften the blow of a coming collapse. Tyler wandered into the office, backpack slung over one shoulder. "What's that?" Jack shook his head and slid the letter under a pile of invoices. "Nothing, just more smoke and mirrors." He didn't tell Tyler about the grant. Didn't tell anyone, because deep down, it felt like a joke. A delay, like someone tossing him a rope right after cutting a hole in the boat. That afternoon, he stood in the middle of the garage, watching the light filter through the dust in the air, the old lift groaning as he tested it out one more time. The place looked almost like it used to, alive, useful. But to Jack, it felt like a ghost. Like someone had tried to buy him a few more weeks of hope without telling him why. He didn't know it had been Grace. Couldn't know. And she wasn't about to tell him not yet. Not when every time she saw him lately, his walls were higher and his voice quieter. She watched from across the street that evening, sitting in her car as Jack shut off the lights and locked up, unaware she was there. She'd given him what she could. But it didn't feel like enough, and maybe it wasn't. The first snow of the season fell in soft flurries over Briar Creek, coating the rooftops and quieting the town beneath a hush of white. The garage windows glowed warm against the gray, the hum of a space heater, working overtime, as Jack wiped his hands and closed the hood on an old sedan. He didn't hear the door open, didn't see Grace until she was standing just inside, cheeks pink from the cold, eyes shadowed with something heavier than winter. He looked up, startled but not unfriendly. "Hey, you're braver than most, walking through this weather without a snow shovel." Grace didn't smile, Jack noticed. "Something wrong?" She took a slow breath, like she was standing at the edge of a cliff, wind in her face, finally done waiting to jump. "I need to tell you something," she said quietly. "And I should have told you a long time ago." Jack wiped his hands on a rag, heart tightening without knowing why. "Okay." She stepped forward, snow still clinging to her coat. "I haven't been honest with you. Not really. My name is Grace Whitmore." Jack froze. She saw it land, the shift in his eyes, confusion first, then recognition, then the slow, inevitable slide into hurt. "As in Whitmore Auto Group," she continued, forcing the words out. "I'm the CEO. My company is the one acquiring properties in this region. Including yours." Silence. A long, cold silence that stretched between them like a fault line. Jack stared at her, jaw tight. "You mean to tell me the woman I've been?" He stopped himself, voice clipped. "The woman who stood here in my garage, drank my coffee, met my kid brother? You're the reason I'm about to lose the only thing I have left of my dad?" Grace's voice broke. "I didn't know when I met you. Not at first. I never expected to care," he said, the words sharp. She flinched. "I tried to help," she added, barely above a whisper. "The grant, that was me. I thought if I could buy you some time." "You think I want your charity?" "It wasn't charity," she said. "It was guilt, and maybe something else, too." Jack shook his head, stepping back. "You should go." "Jack, you made your choice. Now let me make mine." She stood there for a moment longer, snow melting into her hair, lips parted like she had one more thing to say. But whatever it was, it came too late. And he was already walking away. The bay doors creaked open against the cold wind as Jack stepped outside, the sky above Briar Creek choked with thick, low-hanging clouds. The snow had turned to sleet, sharp and bitter, but he barely noticed. His boots crunched over gravel as he walked toward the edge of the lot, fists clenched, breath coming hard in the freezing air. Grace had followed him, coat flapping in the wind, face pale. "Jack, wait, just listen." But he didn't stop, couldn't. Everything in him was boiling over, a pressure he'd kept contained for weeks, months, maybe finally snapping loose. "You lied to me." His voice cracked like a blown gasket. "Every day you showed up here smiling, laughing, acting like you gave a damn. You were planning to gut this place. That's not fair." "No?" He turned, eyes blazing. "Then tell me what part is fair, Grace. The part where you watched me scramble to keep the lights on while your company circled like a vulture? Or the part where you sat in my truck, Drank my coffee, let my kid brother look at you like you were some kind of miracle, while you held the match that was going to burn it all down?" She stood silent, tears brimming but unshed. The wind whipped her hair into her face, but she didn't move to brush it away. "I didn't come here to hurt you," she said. "I never meant for it to go this far." Jack laughed short, sharp, humorless. "You didn't mean to? That's your defense?" He stepped back, his voice lower now, but harder. "You know what hurts the most? I let you in. After everything, after everyone, I let you in. And you were just another lie wrapped in a pretty face and soft words." Grace's voice trembled. "I didn't lie about how I feel." He didn't answer, just looked at her like he didn't recognize her anymore. Then, without another word, he turned and walked away back into the garage, back into the one place he could still pretend he was in control. The bay door groaned as it closed between them, loud and final. And Grace stood there alone, the sound of it echoing like a slammed door in her chest. The sun was just beginning to rise when Grace pulled out of Briar Creek, her car's headlights casting long beams over the frost-covered road. The town was still asleep, the streets empty, the shop windows dark. Only the faintest hint of morning light glowed on the horizon, soft and indifferent. Her hands tightened around the steering wheel, knuckles white. She didn't cry not yet. Her tears had dried somewhere in the early hours of the morning, back in the motel room where she'd stared at the ceiling wondering how everything had gone so wrong. She had come here to understand what her company was really doing to small towns like this one. She had stayed because of Jack, because of the way he looked at the world, because of the quiet steadiness in his hands, the way he never expected anything from her but somehow made her want to give more anyway. And now? Now she was leaving with nothing. No closure, no forgiveness. Just the memory of a slammed garage door and the sound of his voice sharp, wounded, final. The sign welcoming her out of town looked the same as it had the day she arrived. "Come back soon." It felt cruel now. Empty. She had rewritten 100 versions of the conversation in her mind. If she'd told him sooner, if she'd been brave enough to explain, instead of hiding behind good intentions, but no version ended differently. Not when trust had already been broken. As she merged onto the highway, Briar Creek shrank in her rearview mirror, a blur of rooftops and morning fog. Grace swallowed hard. Maybe she had made things worse. Maybe Jack was right. Maybe all she had done was take something simple and honest and twist it into something complicated and painful. But somewhere, buried under the weight of regret, was something else, a spark of truth she couldn't ignore. She hadn't lied about how she felt. Not once. And even if Jack never forgave her, even if she never saw him again, that part was real. But right now, the road ahead was all she had. And Grace drove on, heart heavy, carrying the silence he left behind. The garage was quieter now, not in the usual comforting way it used to be those early mornings when the only sounds were clinking tools and the occasional whistle from the radio. This silence was different, heavier, hollow. Jack hadn't spoken much in days. He was there when the sun came up and long after it disappeared again, moving from car to car with mechanical precision, never lingering, never slowing. Oil changes, brake jobs, electrical issues. He took every job that came through the door and worked like the next repair might keep the walls from collapsing. He barely noticed when customers came and went. Their gratitude met with nods or short grunts. No jokes, no small talk. Just work. Tyler noticed. He stood in the doorway of the office, backpack slung over one shoulder, watching his brother torque a bolt like it had personally offended him. The music was off. The coffee had gone cold. Jack hadn't even realized he'd missed lunch. "You know you've put the same wrench down and picked it back up 4 times in 5 minutes, right?" Tyler asked, cautious but trying to sound light. Jack didn't answer, just tightened the bolt a little more and moved to the next. Tyler walked in slowly, glancing around. "Is this about Grace?" Still no answer. "Because I don't think she meant to hurt you. I mean, yeah, the dealership thing sucks. But she looked at you like..." He paused, embarrassed. Like you were the one thing that made sense." Jack finally looked up, eyes tired. "She lied." "Did she?" Tyler asked. "Or did she just get scared?" Jack said nothing. Tyler stepped closer. "You used to talk to me. About stuff. Now you don't even talk to yourself." Jack turned away. "There's nothing to say." Tyler stared at him for a long moment, then set his bag down and quietly left the room, the door clicking shut behind him. Jack stood there alone in the stillness, grease on his hands, noise in his chest. He picked up the wrench again, but no matter how hard he worked, he couldn't fix the silence Grace left behind. The envelope arrived a week later, tucked neatly between a stack of invoices and a parts catalog on the garage's front counter. Jack saw it the moment he came in from the bay, his name, written in neat, slanted handwriting he'd recognize anywhere. Grace. He didn't touch it at first, just stared at it like it might burst into flames if he blinked. Then, without a word, he picked it up and walked straight to the office. The desk drawer groaned as he opened it, shoving the envelope inside with the rest of the paperwork he didn't have the heart to deal with. Out of sight, like everything else he didn't want to feel. Tyler watched from across the shop, leaning against the doorframe with a rag in his hands. He didn't say anything, just waited until Jack disappeared back into the bay, the sound of an engine turning over muffling the storm inside. Later, when the coast was clear, Tyler crept into the office. The letter wasn't sealed anymore. Jack had torn it open, maybe even started to read it before tossing it aside like it burned. Tyler hesitated only a moment before sliding the paper out and unfolding it carefully. The handwriting was clean, deliberate, like someone trying to say the words just right. "Jack, I know you probably won't read this. I wouldn't blame you. But I needed to try. I should have told you who I was from the start. I didn't because I was afraid of what you'd think, of what I might lose. I didn't plan to care about you. That sounds awful, but it's true. I came to Briar Creek as a business decision. I stayed because of you. You made me feel like a person again. Not a name, not a job. Just Grace. I don't know if that matters anymore. But if it does, if there's even a small piece of you that believes Methan, know this. I'm sorry. For the lies, for the silence. For all of it. And I miss you. Always." Grace. Tyler read it twice, heart heavy. Then he folded it back into the envelope and left it exactly where he found it. Jack wasn't ready to read it, but someday, Tyler hoped he would. Because the words inside were the only thing still trying to reach him. It started with a pie. Mrs. Klein, who'd lived 3 doors down from the Lawson family since Jack was in middle school, showed up one morning with a warm apple pie wrapped in a red checkered towel. She said it was just because. But the way she lingered, eyes soft, voice quiet, told Jack she knew. By the next afternoon, the trickle turned into something more. A steady stream of familiar faces began appearing at Lawson Auto. Not with broken cars, but with envelopes, coffee cans, cash in hand. Mike from the hardware store stopped by on his lunch break, awkwardly sliding a folded 20 across the counter. "It's not much, but I figure I owe you for that time you fixed my brakes and didn't charge me." "I never asked," Jack started. Mike cut him off. "Doesn't mean I didn't owe you." Then came old Mrs. Duffy, who brought a rusted toolbox full of parts she'd found in her late husband's shed. Swearing Jack could probably use 'em better than the dirt could. Even the high schooler, who worked weekends at the gas station, showed up with a crumpled 5 and a mumbled, "You once gave my mom a discount when she couldn't afford the full tire change. I remember." Jack didn't know what to do with it. He wasn't the type to ask for help, never had been. But here, it was people showing up, not out of pity, but because they remembered. They remembered the nights he stayed late to get someone back on the road, the times he refused payment, the way he always gave more than he took. Tyler watched it unfold with wide eyes, hope blooming where worry had settled. "Told you they'd show up," he said quietly. Jack just stood there behind the counter, arms crossed, heart thudding like he was hearing something he hadn't realized he needed, the sound of his town saying, "We've got you." For the first time in weeks, the silence in the shop didn't feel empty. It felt full. Jack stood in the middle of the garage, the smell of motor oil and old leather thick in the air, the light from the overhead bulbs casting long shadows across the cracked floor. The hum of the space heater rattled in the corner, trying its best against the cold. Around him, everything looked the same: wrenches in their usual places, grease stains like old scars on the workbench, but something in him had shifted. The garage wasn't just his. He saw it now, in the way people had shown up. The way Mr. Jensen had brought a box of donuts and stayed for 3 hours, pretending to check the tires on a car that didn't need checking. The way kids from the high school auto class started dropping by after school, asking questions and offering to sweep. The way his neighbors had pressed cash into his hand like it was sacred, like they were investing in something more than just a roof and 4 walls. Lawson Auto was a piece of Briar Creek's fabric, a place where folks gathered without needing a reason. A place where problems got fixed. Cars, sure, but hearts too sometimes. But pride? Pride had kept him silent. Pride had nearly let it all slip through his fingers. He walked toward the workbench, brushing a hand across the photo of his dad, taped above it, faded now, the corners curling. His father's smile still held the same quiet strength Jack had leaned on since the day he died. He could almost hear his voice. "The hardest things to fix aren't machines, Jack. They're the things we carry inside." Jack exhaled, slow and heavy. If he wanted to save the garage, he couldn't do it alone. And he couldn't do it the way he always had, by shutting people out and carrying the weight himself. It wasn't just about holding on anymore. It was about letting others in. Pride had built these walls, but maybe humility would keep the lights on. And maybe, just maybe, it wasn't too late to fight for something bigger than himself. The Whitmore Auto Group headquarters towered above the city, like a monument to precision steel and glass and cold, deliberate symmetry. Jack had never seen a building so polished, so sterile. Everything about it felt like the opposite of Lawson Autowear. Grease smudged the walls, and coffee cups were more common than contracts. He stepped through the revolving doors, flanked by high-end sedans and perfectly manicured landscaping. His boots echoed on the marble floor, out of place in a sea of tailored suits and whispered phone calls. A receptionist looked up, startled. "Can I help you, sir?" "I'm here to speak with whoever's in charge of the Briar Creek acquisition," Jack said, voice calm but clipped. The receptionist typed something, frowned, then picked up a phone. A quiet exchange, then a nod. "Someone will be down to meet you. Please, have a seat." Jack didn't sit. He paced, heart thudding like a misfiring engine. He didn't come here to beg. He came to fight, to demand an explanation, to say the things he hadn't been able to say the night Grace walked out of his life. Then the elevator dinged, and Grace stepped out. Jack froze. She wasn't in flannel or denim this time. She wore a sleek navy blazer, her hair pinned back. Every inch of her the woman he hadn't wanted to believe she was. The woman who held the future of Lawson Auto in her hands. She looked at him, surprised, yes, but not unprepared. "Jack," she said softly. He didn't respond right away. His jaw tightened, fists curling at his sides. "You work here?" "I run it," she said. "CEO, 4th generation." The words felt like a slap. Even now, hearing her say it so plainly made his stomach twist. "I came here to fight," Jack said, voice low. "To plead my case, to whoever was responsible for trying to gut my family's shop." Grace stepped closer. "Then you came to the right place." Something flickered in her eyes, not the cold confidence of a corporate executive, but something warmer, bruised, hopeful. Jack swallowed hard. "Then, let's talk." And for the first time, they didn't look like enemies. They looked like two people finally ready to face the truth together. They sat across from each other in a small, glass-walled conference room high above the city, the world sprawling beneath them in shimmering grids of light. But neither Jack nor Grace looked out the window. Jack leaned forward, arms braced on the table, jaw set. Grace sat opposite, a folder resting between them, plain, unmarked, no branding. Just paper and possibility. "I've spent the last 2 weeks reworking our acquisition model," she said quietly. "This," she tapped the folder, "isn't just about saving Lawson Auto. It's about fixing what we broke." Jack didn't reach for the folder. Not yet. "You said we. You mean Whitmore?" "I mean me," Grace said, her voice firm. "I saw what we were doing to towns like yours. Taking without giving anything real back. It's not just bad business. It's wrong." Jack searched her face for signs of spin, of corporate polish, but found none. Just exhaustion, honesty, and something else that scared him more than betrayal had hope. "We're starting a legacy partner program," she continued. "It's designed to preserve family-owned garages that serve their communities. Instead of buyouts, we offer tools, training, supply chain support, but ownership stays local. The name stays on the door. The heart of the business stays where it belongs." Jack blinked, caught off guard. "And you'd start with mine?" Grace nodded. "Lawson Auto becomes the first pilot location. You set the standard. We learn from you, not the other way around." For a long moment, he didn't speak. Just looked at the folder, then at her. "You didn't have to do this," he said finally. "I know," she said, "but I wanted to. Not for PR. Not to fix my image. For you. For Briar Creek. Because I meant everything I said in that letter. And because I think your garage matters." Jack exhaled slowly. The anger wasn't gone. Not completely. But something warmer had started to take its place. He reached out, finally, and opened the folder. Inside, the first page read, "Lawson Auto, Partnership Proposal." In bold beneath it, "Legacy, not ownership." It wasn't a perfect fix, but it was a start. And this time, it was more than business. It was a second chance. The contract sat on the workbench at Lawson Auto, pinned under a half-full coffee mug in Jack's calloused hand. The edges were already smudged with grease. Jack hadn't meant to stain it, but somehow it felt right, real, like it belonged in this space, not a showroom, not a boardroom. "Here." Grace stood across from him, not in heels or a blazer this time, but in worn boots and a thick flannel shirt, sleeves rolled like she was trying to meet him in his world. She didn't say anything, just waited as Jack flipped through the last few pages again. He exhaled. "You know I hate handouts." "I do," she said. "I'm not signing this if it's charity, if it's guilt dressed up as generosity." "It's not." Grace's voice was steady. "You're not getting rescued, Jack. You're being recognized. This place works because you work. You've kept it alive with grit and heart when most would have given up. I'm not here to take that from you. I'm here to help make sure you never have to do it alone again." Jack looked up at her, eyes searching. "So I stay in charge?" "You're the boss," she nodded. "You run it, the name stays, the shop stays, the only difference is this time someone's got your back." He let out a dry laugh. "I'm not great at sharing the wheel." "I'll sit in the passenger seat," she said, smiling softly. "But I call dibs on the radio." Jack chuckled, quiet, reluctant, but real. He reached for the pen she'd left beside the folder and signed at the bottom with slow, deliberate strokes. No flourish. Just his name, in thick, blue ink, anchoring everything in place. He slid the paper back to her. "All right, partner." Grace took it, folded it carefully, and held out her hand. Jack looked at it for a beat, then shook it solid and firm. They both stood there for a moment longer, surrounded by the familiar scent of oil and old rubber, the silence between them, full, not with tension, but with something like possibility. This wasn't the end. It was the beginning, and this time they were in it together. Grace drove into Briar Creek just after dusk, the town bathed in the soft amber glow of porch lights and street lamps flickering to life. It looked the same as when she'd left Modest, a little worn, stubbornly standing against the pull of time, but this time it felt different. It felt like coming home. She passed the bakery with its chalkboard sign welcoming in the weekend. The diner lights were still on, and she could just make out the silhouette of Linda wiping down the counter through the window. A group of teenagers lingered on the sidewalk outside the general store, their laughter echoing down the quiet street. None of it was flashy, none of it big, but it was real. And now she saw it not as a quaint detour from her corporate life, but as something worth protecting, worth belonging to. The new Lawson Auto sign had gone up that morning. It still had the original name, but now the lettering was clean, the front awning freshly painted, and a small decal at the bottom read, "Proud Local Partner. Whitmore Legacy Program." Subtle. Just enough to hint at change without erasing the past. Grace parked across the street and took a long breath before stepping out. The cold bit at her cheeks, but she didn't rush. Her boots crunched on gravel as she crossed over to the garage, where the lights still burned bright inside. Jack stood at the front counter, talking to a customer. When he saw her through the glass, he paused, but he didn't look away. When she stepped inside, the familiar chime of the bell rang overhead. He nodded at her, a little cautious, a little curious. "You're back." "Yeah," she said, her smile soft. "But not as the CEO this time." He raised an eyebrow. "No?" She shook her head. "Just Grace. Maybe staying for a while. If there's room." Jack looked at her for a moment, then nodded toward the second workbench. "Well, we're short one flashlight holder." She grinned. For the first time in a long time, she didn't feel like someone passing through. She felt like someone who had finally arrived. The rhythm of life in Briar Creek had settled into something steady again. The kind of quiet, dependable heartbeat that pulsed through the town like clockwork shop doors opening at dawn, coffee poured without asking, old engines sputtering back to life with a little love and a lot of elbow grease. At Lawson Auto, the days had found their balance. Jack worked with his usual focus, and Grace now, a regular present shovered just outside his orbit, helping in small ways, organizing parts shelves, filing invoices, ruining perfectly good shop rags trying to clean things that didn't need cleaning. It wasn't perfect, but it was theirs. They moved carefully around each other, like two people who had already burned once and didn't want to fan the flames too fast. Still, something unspoken had begun to thread itself between them again. Not the electricity of their first spark, but something steadier, like coals left glowing under ash. Tyler, of course, noticed it before either of them would admit it. "So," he said one evening, leaning on the edge of the counter while Grace attempted to fix the jammed receipt printer. "When's the wedding?" Grace laughed, a surprised, breathy sound. "What makes you think there's a wedding?" Tyler shrugged. "You're here every day. You're not bad at fixing things. Except printers." Jack walked in just in time to catch the tail end of it. "What's this about a wedding?" "Tyler thinks we're headed for one," Grace said, not meeting Jack's eyes as she tugged hopelessly at the paper roll. Jack raised an eyebrow at his brother, who just grinned like he knew something they didn't. "Well," Jack said slowly, walking past to grab a socket wrench, "I guess it's good to know we've got a planner." Grace finally looked up. "Would you trust him with that kind of pressure?" Jack glanced at Tyler, who shrugged again. "Better me than Linda. She's already sewing napkins." They all laughed, really laughed, for the first time in what felt like weeks. And in that moment, surrounded by grease, receipts, and the scent of motor oil, something settled between Jack and Grace. Not quite a promise. Not yet, but almost. And for now, almost was more than enough. The new Lawson Auto sign gleamed under the midday sun, bold black letters against a polished white background, the same name it had always had. But now, it shone like it believed in itself again. A fresh coat of paint wrapped the building in clean lines of blue and gray. The rusted awning replaced. The cracked windows swapped for clear panes that reflected the quiet pride of a town that refused to let one of its own disappear. A small banner hung beneath the sign, "Grand Reopening, Community Barbecue, today at 2 p.m. It was crooked Tyler had hung it, but no one seemed to mind. Cars lined Main Street. Families wandered in. kids wide-eyed at the new tire displays, old-timers nodding approval at the updated lift system. Inside, the garage still smelled like oil and grease, but now there was something else in the air, hope, and maybe a little barbecue smoke drifting in from the grill set up out back. Jack stood just outside the bay doors, wiping his hands on a clean rag for once, watching the crowd gather with a strange tightness in his chest. It wasn't nerves, not really. It was something more vulnerable-like, gratitude wrapped in disbelief. "Pretty decent turnout," Grace said, stepping beside him, her smile quiet but proud. Jack nodded. "Yeah. I guess people don't mind a little modern flair if the heart's still the same." He looked around the shop. The tool walls had been reorganized, but still held the same tools. The register was digital now, but the same old coffee machine stood stubbornly in the corner. And right beside the front counter, framed in clean glass, hung a photo of his dad, hands on his hips, grinning in front of the garage as it once was. "This place looks good on you," Grace said. Jack glanced at her. "You mean on us. Couldn't have done this alone." She smiled, brushing a smudge off his sleeve. "I know." As the music kicked on and the first burgers hit the grill, Jack stepped forward to greet a customer. Not as a man barely holding on, not as someone watching everything slip away, but as a partner, a business owner, and the beating heart of a garage reborn. The sun had dipped low behind the trees, casting long shadows across the garage floor. Most of the guests had gone, the laughter and barbecue smoke now only faint echoes drifting down Main Street. Lawson Auto stood quieter now, softer. The banner still fluttered overhead, and the last of the folding chairs sat empty near the bay door. Jack stood inside, leaning against the workbench, holding a small silver key in his hand. It wasn't shiny, just worn enough to feel like it belonged to something that mattered. Grace stood across from him, jacket slung over her arm, hair a little windblown from the evening breeze. She looked tired, but in that good way, like the kind of tired you earn from doing something right. He didn't say anything at first. Just turned the key over once more in his fingers, then held it out. She looked at it, then at him. "What's this?" Jack didn't smile. Not quite. But there was something in his eyes, something clear and still, like a calm after a long storm. "It's the spare," he said. "Shop key." She hesitated. "Jack." "I don't do big speeches," he continued, voice quiet, steady. "I don't have fancy words, or flowers, or whatever people are supposed to say when they mean something. But this place, this garage me, we're not much without trust." Grace stepped closer, her hand brushing against his, fingers curling around the key. "I trust you," he said. "Even after all of it. Maybe because of all of it." She looked up at him, eyes wide and glassy. "You're sure?" He nodded. "I'm not just giving you a key to the garage." Grace smiled then, small and trembling at the corners. "I know." For a moment, the world outside disappeared. No titles, no contracts, no past regrets. Just Jack, Grace, and a key that meant everything neither of them could say aloud. It wasn't a grand gesture. It was real, raw, honest. And for them, that was the only kind of love worth building. The late spring sky stretched wide and blue above the back roads of Briar Creek, wildflowers swaying along the ditches, sunlight painting everything in soft gold. Grace's car sat parked just off the shoulder rear tire flat, hazard lights blinking like a soft, steady heartbeat. Jack crouched beside the wheel, lug wrench in hand, smirking up at her. "You sure you don't want me to do it?" Grace crossed her arms, chin lifted in mock defiance. "Nope. I've watched you change tires a dozen times. Pretty sure I've got it now." He raised an eyebrow. "All right. Your mistake." She knelt beside him, squinting at the bolts. "Which one first again?" Jack pointed. "Always loosen them a little before lifting the car." She mimicked his movements carefully, tongue pressed to the corner of her mouth in concentration. Jack watched her, amused but also, if he was honest, kind of in awe. This was a woman who once walked into his garage, looking like she belonged in a boardroom. Now she was elbow-deep in roadside gravel with dirt on her jeans and laughter in her voice. "Okay," she said, wiping her brow. "I'm officially adding this to my resume. Tire-changing extraordinaire." Jack stood, brushing off his hands. "You've come a long way." Grace looked up at him, sun in her eyes, smile soft. "So have you." They stood like that for a moment, the tire half changed, the world quiet around them, except for the hum of cicadas and the occasional bird call. No deadlines, no paperwork. Just two people who had somehow found their way back to the side of the road where it all began. Only now, it wasn't about rescue. It wasn't about power, or pity, or fate. It was just them. Equal. Steady. Home. Grace tightened the last bolt with a grin. "So, do I pass?" Jack stepped closer, brushing a smear of grease from her cheek with his thumb. "With flying colors." She leaned into him then, their foreheads touching, laughter fading into something still and tender. It turned out, everything they needed: trust, forgiveness, love had always been there, right under the hood, right where it belonged.